The year was 9 AD, deep in the dense, mist-shrouded forests of Germania. Here, in the shadow of ancient oaks, one of Rome's most devastating military disasters unfolded. A battle so catastrophic its echoes would haunt the empire for centuries. 3 full legions, nearly 20,000 of Rome's finest soldiers, marched into the wilderness under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus. They never returned. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest wasn't just a defeat, it was a vanishing. The earth itself seemed to swallow these elite troops whole, leaving behind only scattered armor, broken standards, and a mystery that would baffle historians for millennia. What happened to the Lost Legion of Varus? Were they slaughtered to the last man, or did some survive, melting into the wilds of Germania, their stories erased by time? Imagine the scene, the relentless drum of rain, the clash of steel, the war cries of Germanic tribes led by the cunning Arminius, once a trusted ally of Rome. The legions, stretched thin along narrow forest paths, were ambushed in a masterstroke of guerrilla warfare. For days they fought trapped, outmaneuvered, and slowly picked apart. When the dust settled, the mighty 17th, 18th, and 19th legions were gone. Not just defeated, erased, Augustus Caesar, upon hearing the news, is said to have wandered the halls of his palace crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." But no answer ever came. This isn't just a story of battle, it's a riddle wrapped in blood and soil. The fate of these lost soldiers has fueled speculation for centuries. Some say their bones still lie beneath the German countryside, waiting to whisper their secrets. Others believe a handful escaped, vanishing into the tribes or fleeing deeper into the unknown. And then there are the whispers of ghostly apparitions spotted in the mist, of ghostly echoes of marching boots centuries later. Tonight, we're digging into one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. We'll trace the clues, sift through the legends, and ask the chilling question: could the Lost Legion of Varus still be out there waiting to be found? Strap in, this is a journey into the heart of darkness where history and myth collide. Rome's hunger for expansion knew no bounds under Emperor Augustus. By the dawn of the 1st century AD, the empire's reach stretched from the sands of Egypt to the rugged highlands of Britannia. But one frontier remained stubbornly untamed, the vast, untamed wilderness of Germania. To Rome, this land wasn't just another conquest, it was the key to securing their northern borders. Control Germania, and you cut off the barbarian tribe's ability to rally against the empire. Fail, and you left the heart of Rome exposed to raids and rebellions. That's why Augustus appointed Publius Quinctilius Varus, a seasoned politician and military commander, as governor of the newly declared province. Varus wasn't just there to administer, he was there to Romanize. Roads were built, taxes imposed, and local chieftains brought to heel. But Germania was no ordinary territory. Unlike Gaul, which had crumbled under Julius Caesar's campaigns, these dense forests and marshlands were home to fiercely independent tribes. They had no cities to besiege, no treasuries to plunder, just an unbreakable spirit and intimate knowledge of the land. Rome underestimated them, assuming superior discipline and technology would guarantee victory. Varus, a man more accustomed to courtroom politics than wilderness warfare, marched his legions deeper into the unknown, convinced the Germanic tribes would embrace Roman rule. What he didn't realize was that resentment simmered beneath the surface. The Germanic warriors chafed under Roman taxes and conscription. And then there was Arminius, a Germanic noble raised in Rome, trained in its tactics, and even granted citizenship. To Varus, he was a trusted ally. To the tribes, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The stage was set for betrayal. As the legions trudged through the rain-soaked Teutoburg Forest, their fate was already sealed. The question wasn't if disaster would strike, but when. Rome's expansion into Germania wasn't just about land, it was about legacy. Augustus dreamed of an empire so vast and secure that no enemy would dare challenge it. Instead, the loss of 3 legions became a turning point, an indelible stain on his reign. The disaster forced Rome to rethink its ambitions, pulling back from Germania and fortifying the Rhine as its new frontier. But the echoes of that defeat linger even today. What if Varus had heeded the warnings? What if Rome had succeeded? Would Europe's map look entirely different? One thing's certain, the Teutoburg Forest wasn't just a battle, it was the moment Rome's invincibility cracked. Publius Quinctilius Varus was no stranger to power or controversy long before the forests of Germania swallowed his legions. Born into Rome's political elite, he married into the imperial family, becoming a relative of Augustus himself, a connection that likely fast-tracked his career. Before Germania, he governed provinces like Africa and Syria, where he earned a reputation for 2 things: ruthless efficiency and a knack for squeezing wealth from conquered lands. Ancient historians like Cassius Dio paint him as arrogant, a man who believed Roman authority alone could cow any rebellion. Tacitus, ever the sharp critic, hints that Varus misread Germania entirely, treating its tribes like subjects eager for Roman baths and togas rather than warriors defending their homeland. But was he truly the bumbling aristocrat history remembers? Some scholars argue Varus wasn't uniquely incompetent, just a product of Rome's overconfidence. In Syria, his heavy-handed taxation worked because the region had centuries of centralized rule. Germania was different. Here, tribal loyalties ran deeper than gold, and the landscape refused to be tamed. Varus's fatal mistake might have been assuming the same tactics would work in the Teutoburg's tangled wilderness. He marched his legions in full parade formation, complete with mule trains of siege equipment perfect for open battles, but suicide in dense forests where Germanic warriors could strike and vanish like shadows. Then there's Arminius, the Germanic prince raised in Rome. Varus trusted him completely, dismissing warnings of betrayal as paranoia. Was that naivety or arrogance? Tacitus suggests Varus saw Rome's civilizing mission as inevitable, blinding him to the fury he'd stirred. When the ambush came, Varus reportedly fell on his sword rather than face capture, a final act of Roman pride. Yet even in death, he became a cautionary tale. Augustus never sent legions so deep into Germania again. The empire's border hardened at the Rhine, a line still echoed in modern Europe's map. Perhaps the real tragedy of Varus isn't just his failure, but what it represents. The moment Rome learned some frontiers couldn't be conquered, only feared. His name became synonymous with hubris, a warning etched into history. But dig deeper and you'll find a more haunting question. What if he'd succeeded? Would Germania have become another Gaul, its identity erased by Roman roads and temples? Or was its defiance inevitable, a truth Varus couldn't or wouldn't see? The Teutoburg Forest wasn't just any battlefield, it was a nightmare perfectly engineered for slaughter. Picture a labyrinth of towering oaks, their gnarled roots snaking across the ground like tripwires. Thick underbrush clawed at the legs of marching soldiers, while sudden downpours turned narrow paths into slippery death traps. This was no open plain where Rome's disciplined formations could shine. Instead, the terrain forced Varus's legions into a single-file nightmare, their heavy armor and cumbersome shields becoming liabilities in the claustrophobic wilderness. Modern archaeologists have pieced together the chilling geography of the ambush. The likely route took the Romans through a narrow pass between a steep hill and a vast peat bog, a natural bottleneck. On higher ground, Arminius's warriors waited silently, armed with lightweight spears and intimate knowledge of every deer trail. When the attack came, it was from all sides at once. Germanic fighters, nimble and unburdened by heavy gear, struck like vipers before melting back into the trees. The Romans couldn't form proper battle lines. Their javelins and siege engines were useless in the choking undergrowth. Even retreat was impossible. The bog swallowed men whole, their armor dragging them under the murky water like stones. The forest itself became a weapon. Fallen trunks forced detours that split the column, isolating units to be picked off one by one. Rain turned the soil to sticky muck, slowing the legion's famed marching speed to a crawl. Every shadow could hide an attacker, every bend in the path another killing zone. Arminius didn't just use the land, he weaponized it, turning Rome's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The Teutoburg wasn't a battle, it was a meticulously planned execution where the very trees seemed to side with the tribes. Centuries later, walking those same woods, you can almost hear the echoes of that disaster. The distant clash of iron, the cries of men who realized too late they'd been led into a graveyard. The land hasn't forgotten. Even now, archaeologists unearth fragments of Roman mail and sandal nails, silent witnesses to a day when nature itself conspired against an empire. Arminius was no ordinary enemy of Rome. He was its greatest nightmare, a weapon forged by the empire itself. Born around 18 BC to a noble family of the Cherusci tribe, he was taken as a hostage to Rome as a boy, a common practice to ensure tribal obedience. But what was meant to break his spirit instead sharpened his mind. Raised among the elite, he mastered Latin, studied military tactics, and even earned the prestigious rank of equestrian. To Rome, he was the perfect success story, proof that barbarians could be civilized, but beneath the polished surface, something darker simmered. His Roman name, Arminius, might have sounded like loyalty, but his heart never left Germania. Imagine the internal conflict, dining with senators who casually discussed subduing his homeland, training alongside legionaries who might one day butcher his kin. When he returned to Germania as a young officer, ostensibly to help Rome maintain order, he carried two identities, one that Rome trusted and one that burned with resentment. The moment he saw Varus's legions marching deep into the forest, he recognized his chance. Was he a traitor? Rome certainly thought so. To them, he was the ultimate turncoat, a man who had eaten their bread and then used their own tactics against them. But to the Germanic tribes, he was a liberator, a figure who united fractious clans against a common enemy. His genius lay in understanding both worlds. He knew how Romans thought, how they marched where they'd be vulnerable. The ambush at Teutoburg wasn't just an attack, it was a meticulously crafted reversal using Rome's playbook against them. The aftermath reveals even more about his motives. Unlike other tribal leaders who might have reveled in plunder, Arminius continued resisting Roman incursions for years. When Germanicus launched revenge campaigns, it was Arminius who rallied the tribes again, proving his commitment went beyond a single victory. Yet even among his own people, his legacy was complicated. Some chieftains distrusted his Roman ties, seeing him as a potential tyrant in the making. His own father-in-law, Segestes, openly opposed him, even warning Varus of the coming betrayal. In the end, Arminius wasn't just fighting for freedom, he was fighting for Germania's soul. Had Rome succeeded, his culture might have vanished beneath roads and amphitheaters. Instead, his defiance ensured Germania remained a thorn in Rome's side for centuries. Modern Germany still celebrates him as a national hero, a symbol of resistance against overwhelming odds. But history rarely deals in pure heroes or villains. Arminius was both a man torn between worlds who chose blood over loyalty and in doing so changed the course of Europe forever. The first day of the ambush began with deceit disguised as opportunity. Varus's scouts, likely handpicked by Arminius himself, reported minor unrest ahead, just enough to lure the legions deeper into the forest without full alert. As rain lashed down, turning paths to sludge, the columns stretched over miles, their heavy supply wagons sinking axle-deep in mud. Then, without warning, a hail of spears erupted from the tree line. Germanic warriors, painted for war, struck like ghosts, slashing at the flanks before vanishing into the undergrowth. The Romans, trained for open battle, couldn't form their defensive testudo formations in the tight space. Panic spread as the rear guard realized the disturbance ahead was a trap. The tribes had felled trees to block retreat. By nightfall, the legions were bleeding but not broken. They dug makeshift trenches, hoping to regroup at dawn, but Arminius knew their tactics. As the exhausted Romans tried to sleep, Germanic hunters mimicked the cries of wounded comrades in the dark, drawing rescuers into ambushes. When the second day dawned, the forest itself seemed hostile. Fog clung to the trees, masking movement until attackers were already upon them. The tribes targeted officers first, cutting down commanders to sow chaos. Roman historian Cassius Dio wrote of soldiers stumbling blindly. Their formations shattered like glass, as Germanic fighters used the terrain to funnel them into bogs where heavily armored men drowned helplessly. The final day was pure butchery. The remaining legionaries, desperate and starving, tried to break out toward open ground, but Arminius had anticipated this. His forces herded them into a narrow defile where pre-dug pits lined with sharpened stakes waited. Those who avoided the traps faced a storm of arrows from elevated positions. The few who reached the supposed safety of a hilltop found it ringed with woven thorn barriers, another Germanic innovation. Trapped with no water or supplies, the survivors made their last stand. Roman accounts describe Varus, wounded and realizing the hopelessness, falling on his sword to avoid capture. His officers followed suit rather than face crucifixion or sacrifice to Germanic gods. The aftermath was eerily silent. Germanic tribes combed the battlefield, executing the wounded and collecting trophies. They left the bodies to rot, a deliberate psychological blow. Later, when Germanicus led a punitive expedition years after, his soldiers described finding bleached bones still clad in armor, skulls nailed to trees as warnings. The storm, the terrain, and Arminius's intimate knowledge of Roman tactics had fused into a perfect killing machine. This wasn't just defeat, it was annihilation, a lesson written in blood and mud that would echo through history. In Germania, the forest itself was Rome's deadliest enemy. The news of the massacre reached Rome like a thunderclap. Imagine the scene: messengers caked in mud and exhaustion, stumbling into the imperial palace with word that 3 entire legions, the backbone of Rome's northern might, had been erased from existence. Emperor Augustus, the man who had transformed Rome from a republic into an empire, reportedly tore his robes in anguish. Ancient historians like Suetonius claim he wandered the halls for months, pounding his fists against the walls and crying out to the absent Varus, "Give me back my legions." This wasn't just grief, it was the sound of invincibility shattering. Rome had suffered defeats before, but nothing like this. The loss of nearly 20,000 soldiers along with their eagles, the sacred standards that symbolized Rome's military pride, struck at the heart of the empire's identity. Panic spread through the city. Mothers clutched their sons tighter, fearing new conscriptions to fill the gap. Senators whispered that the barbarians might now march unchecked all the way to the Alps. Augustus took drastic action. He ordered night watches in the city to prevent riots, banned citizens of Germanic origin from wearing Roman dress, and even cancelled public festivals. A stark admission that celebration was unthinkable amid such humiliation. The military fallout was immediate and brutal. Rome abandoned its dream of Germania as a province overnight. The Rhine River, once just a line on a map, became a fortress frontier, guarded by reinforced legions who never again ventured deep into those cursed forests. The empire's expansionist era was effectively over. Augustus's final years were spent consolidating, not conquering. And in a chilling act of psychological warfare, the Germanic tribes sent the captured legionary eagles back piece by piece over the years, a taunt that turned Roman pride into an open wound. But the deepest scar was psychological. For the first time, Rome had to confront the idea that some lands couldn't be tamed, some people couldn't be civilized. The poet Ovid, exiled around this time, wrote of the empire's shadow stretching too thin, a veiled critique of overreach. The Teutoburg disaster became a cautionary tale told to young officers. a reminder that no matter how polished your roads or how sharp your swords, the wilderness and the wills of those who called it home could still swallow you whole. Augustus died without ever avenging the legions, leaving his successor Tiberius to send Germanicus on grim campaigns that recovered the eagles but never the myth of Roman invincibility. The forest had spoken, and its message echoed for centuries. Here, even empires bled. The fate of Varus's legions remains one of history's most haunting riddles. Were they wiped out to the last man, or did some vanish into the wilderness, their stories rewritten by time? The traditional narrative paints a picture of total annihilation, with Roman historians like Cassius Dio describing a slaughter so complete no living soul escaped. But archaeology tells a more complicated story. At Kalkriese, the site believed to be the heart of the Teutoburg ambush, excavations revealed chilling clues: mass graves filled with male skeletons bearing terrible wounds, Roman coins hastily buried as if someone hoped to return, and fragments of military gear scattered in chaotic patterns. Yet amid the carnage there's eerie silence, no personal items, no sign of the wounded crawling away, just a sudden, violent end. But not all evidence points to massacre. Some historians argue that Germanic tribes, though fierce, weren't indiscriminate killers. Captives had value as slaves, bargaining chips, or even recruits. Roman soldiers, especially auxiliaries from other frontier regions, might have switched allegiances to survive. Tacitus mentions Germanic tribes adopting Roman military techniques after Teutoburg, raising the provocative question: who taught them? Fragments of Roman armor found in tribal settlements far from the battlefield hint at integration, not just looting. One particularly telling find is a damaged Roman cavalry helmet repurposed as a ceremonial object, its imperial insignia deliberately defaced but the craftsmanship preserved. Was this a trophy or proof of a legionary's second life among his enemies? Then there are the whispers of folklore. Centuries later, Germanic legends spoke of iron men who wandered out of the forest, offering their skills in exchange for shelter. Could these have been survivors stripped of their identity but not their training? Modern DNA studies add another layer. Some rural communities near Teutoburg show unexpected genetic links to Mediterranean populations, though whether these traces date to the legion's era or later Roman trade remains debated. The truth may lie somewhere in the shadows. Kalkriese's bones tell us many died brutally, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. In the chaos of ambush, some likely fled, only to perish later in the wilderness or be absorbed by tribes who saw them as assets, not just adversaries. Rome's records, written by elites with pride at stake, had every reason to insist on total sacrifice. Yet history is rarely so neat. The lost legions may haunt us precisely because their endings weren't uniform. Some met steel, others oblivion, and a few, perhaps, forged uneasy new lives in the land that broke their empire. For centuries, the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest existed in the shadowy realm of legend, a story passed down by Roman historians, but with no physical evidence to pin it to a map. Then, in the late 1980s, a British amateur archaeologist named Major Tony Clun made a discovery that would rewrite history. Armed with a metal detector and a hunch, he wandered the soggy fields near Kalkriese, a quiet village in northern Germany. What he unearthed wasn't just a few rusty relics, it was a smoking gun. A silver denarius minted between 2 BC and 4 AD lay half buried in the mud. Then another and another. These weren't lost coins, they were a trail leading straight to one of archaeology's most chilling crime scenes. Excavations soon revealed a gruesome panorama. Human bones protruded from the soil, many bearing the telltale marks of violent death: skulls crushed by blunt force, ribs notched with a clean slash of blades. Nearby, iron spearheads and fragments of Roman lorica armor lay tangled in the earth, as if the ground itself had swallowed the chaos of battle whole. Most damning of all, a single, rusted face masked from a Roman cavalry helmet, its hollow eyes staring blankly upward. this wasn't just any skirmish, it was a systematic slaughter. The sheer concentration of artifacts left no doubt. Kalkriese was the graveyard of Varus's legions, but what sealed the identification were the eerie details that matched ancient accounts. The terrain, a narrow pass between a hill and a vast bog, aligned perfectly with descriptions of the ambush site. Archaeologists uncovered a makeshift Germanic rampart, a wall of packed earth and branches used to funnel Romans into the killing zone. Even though weather played its part, layers of sediment showed that heavy rain had turned the ground to quicksand, trapping armored soldiers like flies in amber. And then there were the coins. Their dates clustered around 9 AD, the exact year of the disaster. Roman soldiers were paid 3 times a year, and these coins, many found in neat, hurriedly buried stacks, suggest payday had just passed when death came calling. Perhaps the most haunting finds were the small, personal items that humanized the tragedy. A silver spoon bent under the weight of a fallen body, a child's wooden toy likely carried by a soldier as a keepsake from home. Even the remains of mules still yoked to their carts, their bones mingled with the men who'd led them. Kalkriese didn't just confirm the battle's location, it resurrected its horror moment by moment. Today, a museum stands on the site, its glass walls framing the very soil where Rome's ambition bled out. Walking among the exhibits, you can almost hear the whispers of 20,000 ghosts, their stories no longer lost to the forest but etched into the earth itself. To Rome, the eagle standards weren't just symbols, they were sacred. Each legion carried one, a gilded emblem of Jupiter himself, believed to hold the divine favor of the empire. Losing an eagle wasn't just a military setback, it was an affront to the gods, a stain on Rome's very soul. So when all 3 eagles of Varus's legions vanished into the Teutoburg mud, the empire didn't just rage, it trembled. Augustus, already reeling from the loss of his legions, now faced a spiritual crisis. Without these holy relics, how could Rome claim the protection of the heavens? Enter Germanicus, the young general tasked with salvaging Rome's pride. In 15 AD, 6 years after the massacre, he led a punitive expedition into Germania, part revenge mission, part sacred quest. His soldiers marched with a singular obsession: find the eagles. Ancient accounts describe a campaign steeped in grim spectacle. Tacitus writes of Germanicus's men stumbling upon the battle's aftermath, fields littered with bleached bones, some still nailed to trees as tribal trophies. They gave the dead proper burials, a gesture of respect mixed with propaganda, but the real prize remained elusive. Then, a breakthrough. Near a fortified tribal village, scouts reported a glint of gold beneath the earth. The 17th Legion's eagle, buried in a shallow grave, likely hidden to avoid desecration or perhaps as a bargaining chip. Its recovery was a propaganda coup, proof Rome could still strike back. A year later, the 18th eagle was wrested from another tribe after a brutal skirmish, but the 19th, that one resisted discovery, vanishing into myth. That's where the legend takes a haunting turn. Centuries later, medieval chronicles whispered of a ghostly eagle seen in the Teutoburg mists, its wings rusted, its cry like scraping metal. Some claimed it was the 19th standard, cursed to wander until Rome's honor was restored. Modern archaeologists remain skeptical, but the tale persists, a testament to how deeply the loss cut. Even today, the missing eagle lingers as history's unanswered question: did it melt into the soil, or does it still wait, guarded by the shadows of the forest? Germanicus's campaigns restored 2 eagles, but they couldn't erase the lesson. Those gilded icons weren't just metal and wood, they were the soul of the legions. Their loss and partial recovery taught Rome that some wounds never fully heal, no matter how many battles you win. The forest didn't just swallow Varus's legions, it spat out whispers. Stories persist of survivors, scattered like embers from a dying fire, flickering in the darkness of history. Roman accounts insist no one escaped the Teutoburg slaughter, but human nature rebels against total annihilation. Could 20,000 men truly vanish without a trace? Folk tales across Germania speak of ironclad ghosts wandering the wilderness, while medieval chronicles spin yarns of a Lost Legion that marched eastward, seeking refuge in distant lands. These legends aren't just fantasy, they're rooted in unsettling gaps in the record. Take the case of the Roman cavalry officer Marcus Caelius. His gravestone, discovered near modern-day Xanten, bears a chilling epitaph, freed from the Teutoburg disaster. Was he a rare escapee, or did the tribes spare him for some grim purpose? Archaeology offers tantalizing clues. At the Kalkriese site, a handful of Roman artifacts were found far beyond the main battlefield. A discarded dagger here, a belt buckle there, as if someone shed their identity while fleeing. Then there's the matter of the Germanic tribes themselves. Tacitus notes that years later, during Germanicus's revenge campaigns, scouts reported encountering warriors who fought with Roman discipline. Were these defectors or captives forced to train their enemies? The myth of the Lost Legion is even more haunting. A 12th century manuscript from Prague claims a band of survivors trekked east, eventually serving the kingdom of Noricum. Byzantine historians later wrote of a mysterious contingent of Latin-speaking mercenaries defending the Danube frontier, men who allegedly greeted Roman envoys with tears and stories of the Great Forest betrayal. These accounts are almost certainly embellished, but they reveal a truth. People couldn't accept that every last legionary had perished. The idea of a doomed remnant clinging to their identity in exile was simply too compelling. Yet for every romanticized tale, there's a darker possibility. Germanic tribes didn't just kill prisoners, they absorbed them. Ritual sacrifices at sacred groves are well documented, but so is slavery. A 1st century Germanic chieftain's grave near the Elbe River contained a Roman-style sword and a silver cup engraved with Latin letters. Were these spoils of war or gifts from a captive smith hoping to curry favor? Even the fate of Varus's own family hints at uneasy compromises. His daughter's husband, a Roman governor, later negotiated with the very tribes who slaughtered his father-in-law's army. Was that pragmatism or a silent acknowledgement that some bonds forged in blood or survival transcended empire? The truth likely lies fractured like sunlight through Teutoburg's leaves. A few may have slipped away only to die starving in the wilds. Others, taken captive, might have traded their skills for food or freedom. And yes, some probably did vanish eastward, their stories merging with myth. But the real horror and fascination isn't in definitive answers. It's in the lingering doubt that somewhere, somehow, fragments of the lost legions endured. Not as heroes or ghosts, but as men who learned a terrible lesson. In Germania, the line between conqueror and captive was as thin as a dagger's edge. Germanicus didn't just march into Germania for vengeance, he carried the weight of an empire's humiliation on his shoulders. By 14 AD, 6 years after the Teutoburg disaster, Rome still seethed. The new Emperor Tiberius, once a brilliant general himself, knew the wound to Roman pride needed cauterizing. So he sent his nephew Germanicus, a charismatic young commander with fire in his veins and the bloodline of Augustus in his heritage. This wasn't just another military campaign, it was a reckoning. Germanicus's strategy was as brutal as it was theatrical. His legions cut through Germania like a scythe, burning villages and trampling sacred groves. But this wasn't mindless destruction, it was psychological warfare. He targeted the very heart of tribal identity, proving Rome could strike anywhere, anytime. The message was clear: defy us and your world burns. Yet amid the scorched earth, Germanicus harbored a deeper mission to reclaim what the forest had stolen. The lost eagles weren't just metal and wood, they were the soul of the legions, and without them, Rome's spiritual armor remained cracked. Then came the moment that chilled even battle-hardened legionaries. Near the Teutoburg site, scouts stumbled upon a clearing littered with bones, not scattered, not buried, displayed. Skulls grinned from tree branches, skeletal hands still clutched rusted swords. Tacitus, never one to spare grim details, wrote of armor fused to ribcage by time, of helmets split by Germanic axes. Germanicus ordered a proper burial, not just for decency, but as propaganda. Every shovel of earth was a performance. Rome honors its dead, even in defeat, but the real prize still eluded him. Rumors swirled of eagles hidden in tribal sanctuaries, guarded by warriors sworn to die rather than surrender them. Then in 15 AD, a breakthrough. After a vicious clash with the Bructeri tribe, scouts found the 17th Legion standard buried beneath an altar as if offered to the gods. The recovery electrified Rome. Coins were minted celebrating the eagle's return, and Germanicus paraded it through the streets like a returning hero. A year later, the 18th eagle was wrested from the Marsi in a midnight raid, its gilded wings tarnished but intact. Yet for all his successes, Germanicus's campaigns bore a dark irony. The deeper he pushed into Germania, the more he faced ghosts. Tribes used scorched earth tactics, vanishing into the forests rather than facing his legions head-on. The land itself seemed to resist him. Floods bogged down supply lines, and autumn storms forced retreats. Even his victories felt hollow. He'd punished the tribes, yes, but he couldn't remake Germania into a province. The Rhine remained Rome's hard border, a lesson written in blood and accepted at last. The most haunting legacy of Germanicus's revenge wasn't the reclaimed eagles or the burned villages, it was the bones. His men reported finding mass graves far beyond Teutoburg, some holding remains with hands still bound, suggesting prisoners executed in ritual offerings. These weren't just casualties of war, they were messages. The tribes had their own code of honor, their own ways of marking territory. Every bleached skeleton Germanicus buried was a reminder. Rome could march in, but it couldn't stay. By 16 AD, Tiberius ordered a halt to the campaigns. The eagles mattered, but not at the cost of endless bloodshed. Germanicus returned to Rome a hero, but his heart carried shadows. He'd avenged Varus, yes, but he'd also seen Germania's truth, a land that swallowed empires whole. His final report to the Senate contained an eerie admission. We found the remnants of our brothers, but not their peace. The forest kept its secrets, and the 19th eagle never came home. Some say Germanicus, before his own mysterious death years later, dreamed of those bones whispering in the wind, a chorus no victory could silence. To the Romans, the dead weren't just gone, they were restless. The unburied, the dishonored, those denied proper rights. They were thought to linger, trapped between worlds, their anguish seeping into the land itself. So when 3 legions vanished in the Teutoburg Forest, their bodies left to rot beneath the oaks, it wasn't just a military tragedy, it was a supernatural crisis. Ancient writers like Cassius Dio tell of soldiers sent to fortify the Rhine years later who reported eerie sights. Spectral figures in tattered legionary garb, their faces half hidden by mist, standing silent among the trees. Others spoke of distant trumpet blares at twilight, though no Roman camp lay within miles. Even Germanicus's men, during their grim burial detail, claimed to hear whispers in Latin from empty thickets, pleas for home, curses against Varus, or warnings to turn back. These weren't just campfire tales. Roman religion held that the dead required exact rituals to cross into the afterlife. Without burial, a soul wandered, tormenting the living until granted peace. The Lost Legions, denied even the dignity of a pyre, became the ultimate unquiet dead. Tacitus notes that locals avoided the forest for generations, fearing the lemur's vengeful spirits said to drain the warmth from travelers' bones. One chilling account describes a merchant who stumbled upon a clearing where spectral soldiers still fought an endless battle, their wounds glowing like embers in the dark. When he tried to flee, the ground itself seemed to clutch at his feet, as if the earth remembered its feast of blood. But the hauntings weren't confined to Germania. In Rome, the disaster birthed its own ghosts. Augustus, already haunted by his failure to recover the eagles, reportedly woke to phantom footsteps in his palace. Suetonius claims he dreamed of the dead legionaries lining his halls, their eyes hollow, their mouths sewn shut with thorny vines, a nightmare so vivid he banned all mention of Varus's name in his presence. Even the legions stationed along the Rhine developed rituals to ward off the Teutoburg dead, leaving offerings at roadside shrines or saluting when passing certain groves. To them, the lost weren't just comrades, they were omens. The most enduring legend, though, belongs to the 19th Legion's missing eagle. Long after Germanicus recovered the other standards, whispers persisted of a gilded phantom glimpsed in the forest's deepest reaches. Medieval monks later wrote of hunters finding a rusted eagle half sunk in a bog, its wings twitching as if struggling to take flight until it dissolved into mist when touched. Whether myth or collective guilt, these stories reveal a profound truth. Rome could rebuild its armies, but the shame of Teutoburg festered like an open wound. The ghosts weren't just lost souls, they were reminders that even empires answer to the dead. What makes these tales so chilling isn't their supernatural flair, it's their roots in real Roman terror. The empire's strength lay in order, in control, but the forest defied both. In the end, the legion's hauntings may say less about restless spirits and more about the living, a civilization forced to confront the limits of its power, where the wild and the dead held sway no legion could break. The dense forests of Germania may have concealed the fate of Varus's legions for centuries, but modern technology has begun peeling back those layers of secrecy. In the early 1800s, a German historian named Theodor Mommsen first theorized that the battle took place near Kalkriese, sparking a hunt that would span generations. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and archaeologists armed with more than just shovels and hunches began uncovering the truth. Ground-penetrating radar revolutionized the search, revealing disturbances in the soil that hinted at mass graves and scattered artifacts, clues invisible to the naked eye. One of the most startling discoveries came in 1993, when researchers uncovered a stretch of earth packed with Roman coins, all dated before 9 AD. These weren't random losses, they formed a trail, likely from a paymaster's bag torn open in the chaos of battle. Nearby, metal detectors pinged over a gruesome find: human bones bearing the unmistakable marks of violence. A skull fractured by a Germanic club, a vertebrae split by a spear thrust, even the delicate bones of a hand still curled around a rusted dagger. These weren't just archaeological artifacts, they were silent witnesses to the final moments of the legions. Recent excavations have painted an even clearer picture. In 2018, a team using LiDAR, a laser-based mapping technology, identified subtle terrain features matching ancient descriptions of the ambush site. A narrow pass between a hill and a bog, now hidden beneath farmland, lined up perfectly with Roman accounts of the killing zone, and then there were the ditches. Not natural formations, but man-made traps, their slopes still studded with iron nails and spear tips, proof that Arminius's forces had engineered the landscape itself to slaughter the invaders. But perhaps the most haunting find came in 2021. A child's wooden doll carved in Mediterranean style found nestled beside a shattered breastplate. Was this a soldier's keepsake carried thousands of miles from home only to be lost in the mud, or did it belong to a camp follower, one of the many non-combatants who vanished alongside the legions? The doll's presence raises uncomfortable questions about the full human cost of the disaster, not just warriors but families swallowed by the forest. Despite these breakthroughs, mysteries linger. The 19th Legion's eagle remains missing, and some scholars argue secondary battle sites may still lie undiscovered. Modern search techniques have transformed Teutoburg from myth into history, yet the land hasn't surrendered all its secrets. Each excavation peels back another layer, but the forest, it seems, still holds its dead close. The idea that every last soldier perished in the Teutoburg Forest feels almost too neat, too final. History rarely offers such clean endings, and whispers linger of those who might have slipped through the Germanic noose. One persistent legend claims a fragment of the legions, perhaps a cavalry unit or a detached cohort, managed to break free during the chaos and fled eastward. Proponents of this theory point to scattered Roman artifacts discovered far beyond the empire's reach. A rusted gladius unearthed near the Vistula River, a fragment of Lorica segmentata found in a Baltic chieftain's grave, even a bronze eagle-headed buckle matching legionary designs excavated in the Carpathian Mountains. None bear inscriptions tying them definitively to Varus's forces, but their presence in these distant lands raises eyebrows. Could they have been carried by survivors desperate to put miles between themselves and the slaughter? Then there's the curious case of the Lost Legion myth, chronicled in medieval chronicles like the Annals of Quedlinburg. It tells of a band of Romans who, after the battle, abandoned all hope of returning west and instead offered their services as mercenaries to the kingdom of Noricum. The story smacks of romantic invention, but it's not entirely implausible. Desertion wasn't uncommon in the ancient world, and skilled soldiers were valuable commodities even among enemies. Tacitus himself notes that Germanic tribes occasionally spared captured engineers or blacksmiths for their expertise. If a group of legionaries surrendered their eagles and pledged loyalty to a tribal warlord, might they have been absorbed rather than executed? More controversial are claims linking the lost legions to distant conflicts. A 2nd century Chinese text, the Book of Later Han, mentions a peculiar force of heavy infantry fighting for the Xiongnu nomads along the Silk Road, men who reportedly fought in tight formations and carried rectangular shields. Some fringe historians argue these could have been Teutoburg survivors, though mainstream scholars dismiss it as coincidence. Similarly, a cluster of Roman-style graves in modern-day Crimea, dated to the early 1st century AD, have fueled speculation that a contingent sailed east across the Black Sea. The graves contain no definitive proof, but the dead were buried with Italian-made fibulae and drinking vessels, items rare for the region at the time. Perhaps the most haunting theory involves the tribes themselves. Germanic burial sites from the decades after Teutoburg occasionally yield Roman bodies interred with care, men laid to rest with their weapons, their faces turned toward the west. Were these enemy warriors granted rare honor, or were they something else? Deserters who married into tribes, adopted sons who'd renounced Rome. The soil keeps its secrets, but the very existence of these graves suggests exceptions to the massacre's narrative. For all the intrigue, hard evidence remains frustratingly scarce. Rome's historians had every reason to insist on total annihilation. Propaganda demanded it. Yet nature abhors a vacuum, and history abhors absolute endings. Whether through flight, captivity, or sheer dumb luck, it's statistically unlikely that 20,000 men left no survivors. The truth may be less dramatic than legends of phantom legions marching into the steppes, but no less human. A handful of broken men, stripped of their identity, who chose to vanish rather than die. Their stories, if they existed, dissolved into the mist, leaving only whispers and the occasional glint of Roman steel in foreign earth. The legend of the Lost Legions didn't just fade into history, it ignited the imaginations of artists, writers, and even propagandists for centuries. One of the earliest and most striking tributes is the colossal Hermannstenkmal monument in Germany's Teutoburg Forest, completed in 1875. This towering statue of Arminius, spear raised triumphantly against an unseen Roman foe, wasn't just art, it was a political statement. Unveiled during the rise of German nationalism, it transformed the ancient chieftain into a symbol of unity against foreign oppression. The monument's inscription says it all. Germany's unity is my strength is Germany's might. But the story's grip on culture runs deeper than stone and bronze. In 1808, German playwright Heinrich von Kleist penned Die Hermannschlacht, a fiery drama that reimagined the battle as a rallying cry against Napoleon's occupation. Kleist's Arminius isn't just a tactician, he's a freedom fighter willing to burn his own wife alive to ensure tribal loyalty, a brutal twist that shocked audiences but underscored the era's obsession with sacrifice for nationhood. The play's popularity surged again during both world wars, when the Nazis weaponized the Teutoburg narrative, framing it as a proto-Aryan victory over decadent Mediterranean invaders. Not all adaptations were so heavy-handed. 19th-century painters like Johann Nepomuk Giger captured the battle's chaos with cinematic flair: legionaries drowning in bogs, Germanic warriors leaping from fog-shrouded trees, while novelist Wallace Breem's Eagle in the Snow, 1970, offered a haunting alternate history. What if the legions had survived only to defend the Rhine against later barbarian hordes? Even Hollywood couldn't resist. The 1964 film The Last Roman, originally Kampf am Rom, dramatized the clash, though with more polished armor and fewer muddy horrors than reality offered. The tale's flexibility is its power. For Italian fascists in the 1930s, Varus's doomed march became a cautionary parable about overreach, while East German communist leaders recast Arminius as a proto-revolutionary. Modern video games like Total War, Rome 2 let players rewrite history, steering the legions to victory, or relive their slaughter in pixelated detail. What makes this enduring appeal so fascinating isn't just the battle's drama, but its ambiguity. Unlike Thermopylae or Waterloo, Teutoburg lacks a clear moral. Is it a story of resistance or betrayal, heroism or hubris? Artists keep returning because the answers shift with the times. The lost legions may have vanished in 9 AD, but their ghosts still march through our stories, forever caught between the forest's shadows and the light of interpretation. Arminius stands as one of history's most contradictory figures, a man carved into myth by the hands of those who needed him to mean something. To the Romans, he was the ultimate betrayer, a viper nursed at their breast who turned and struck. Tacitus called him the liberator of Germania, but even that grudging praise dripped with disdain. For centuries, Rome's historians painted him as a cunning savage, a barbarian who exploited their trust to orchestrate a massacre. Yet in Germania, his name became legend, morphing over time from tribal chieftain to national icon, a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. The irony: both views are distortions shaped by the agendas of those who wielded his story. By the Middle Ages, Arminius, renamed Hermann by Romantic nationalists, had become a folk hero. German bards spun tales of his defiance, casting the Teutoburg Forest as a sacred ground where Germanic identity was forged in blood. This myth-making reached its peak in the 19th century, when a fractured Germany sought unifying heroes. The colossal Hermannsdenkmal statue, its sword pointed west toward France, wasn't just art. It was propaganda, a rallying cry against external threats, real or imagined. The Nazis later twisted his legacy further, framing Arminius as a proto-Aryan Superman whose victory proved Germanic racial superiority. Never mind that the real Arminius likely saw himself not as a German, a concept that didn't exist yet, but as a Cherusci noble defending his tribe's autonomy. Modern scholars strip away these layers of myth to reveal a far more complex figure. Arminius wasn't just a guerrilla leader, he was a product of two worlds, fluent in Latin and Roman tactics yet fiercely loyal to his homeland. His betrayal wasn't mindless savagery but calculated pragmatism. After Teutoburg, he spent years battling Roman incursions, yet even his own people grew wary of his ambition. Tacitus records that he was assassinated by rival chieftains who feared he'd become a tyrant, a fate that underscores his tragedy. He was too Roman for the tribes, too tribal for Rome. Today, his legacy is being reassessed. Some historians frame him as an early freedom fighter, a defender of indigenous culture against imperialism. Others caution against glorifying a man whose victory entrenched centuries of conflict between Rome and Germania. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, a brilliant strategist who played the hand he was dealt, only to become a pawn in later ideological wars. Even now, his ghost lingers not in the Teutoburg mists, but in the stories we tell about identity, resistance, and the price of defiance. Whether hero or villain depends on who's holding the pen. And perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of all. Even after 2,000 years, the Teutoburg Forest hasn't surrendered all its secrets. While Kalkriese stands as the confirmed epicenter of the massacre, archaeologists estimate only a fraction of the battlefield has been excavated, leaving haunting gaps in the story. Take the missing legion's burial sites. Roman tradition demanded cremation or proper interment, yet Germanicus's men found bones scattered across miles, some still clad in armor, others piled in makeshift pits. But here's the chilling part: the numbers don't add up. Kalkriese's mass graves hold hundreds, not thousands. So where did the rest go? One theory suggests the Germanic tribes disposed of bodies in bogs, a practice with grim precedent. Peat wetlands across northern Europe have yielded impeccably preserved bog bodies, often victims of ritual sacrifice. In 2014, a team probing a swamp near Kalkriese uncovered Roman-era nails from military sandals embedded deep in the sediment. Were these lost during a hasty burial, or did the tribes dump corpses into the murk as an offering to their gods? The acidity of bogs can dissolve bones entirely, leaving only metal fragments behind. If true, the final resting place of thousands may lie beneath these still waters, their remains erased by chemistry and time. Then there's the enigma of Varus himself. Ancient sources claim he fell on his sword to avoid capture, but his body's fate remains a riddle. Germanicus reported recovering his bones years later, yet Tacitus casts doubt, noting they might have been misidentified. In 2019, a team excavating a tribal shrine near Detmold found a fragment of a Roman general's cloak clasp, identical to those worn by high-ranking officers like Varus. Nearby lay a shattered wine amphora, a rare Italian import. Was this a trophy from the battlefield, or evidence Varus's corpse was paraded as a grisly war prize? Without DNA evidence near impossible after millennia, we may never know. Recent digs have turned up smaller, no less puzzling finds. A 2022 survey using magnetometry revealed a series of shallow trenches just north of Kalkriese, arranged in a pattern that mirrors Roman marching camps. But this site shows no signs of battle, no weapons, no human remains. Could this be where a detachment of the legions made their last stand before being overrun? Or did survivors attempt to regroup here, only to vanish into the wilderness? Perhaps the most tantalizing cold case revolves around the 19th Legion's eagle. While the 17th and 18th standards were recovered, the 19th remains lost. In 2017, a farmer plowing a field near Osnabrück struck metal, a gilded eagle's wingtip, too small for a legionary standard but matching decorative motifs from the era. Archaeologists scoured the area, but the rest of the artifact never surfaced. Was it a piece of the missing eagle, broken off and hidden, or merely a trader's trinket unrelated to the battle? The forest keeps its secrets close, revealing just enough to stoke our curiosity, never enough to satisfy it. Every excavation peels back another layer, yet each answer births new questions. The real mystery isn't just what we've found, it's what still lies buried, waiting for the right shovel, the right technology, or the right stroke of luck to whisper its truth. Until then, the Legion's ghosts linger, their stories half told, their endings still written in the earth. The bones of Kalkriese don't just lie silent. They speak in fractures, isotopes, and the faint traces of lives cut short. Forensic anthropologists examining these remains have reconstructed a grim tableau of the Legion's final hours. Many skulls show devastating trauma, crushed cheekbones from Germanic clubs, punctured temples from spear thrusts, even clean slashes across cervical vertebrae where blades found gaps in armor. But it's not just the brutality that stands out, it's the patterns. The wounds cluster on the left sides of skeletons, suggesting warriors exploited a fatal weakness. Roman soldiers trained to fight with shields in their left hands were vulnerable when formations broke. Tribesmen, knowing this, swarmed their exposed flanks like wolves targeting wounded prey. Deeper analysis reveals surprises about who these soldiers really were. Isotope testing, a technique that analyzes chemical signatures in teeth, uncovered a startling diversity. While some remains match the mineral profiles of Italy's volcanic soils, others trace to the Danube, the Balkans, even North Africa. This wasn't just a legion of Romans, it was a mosaic of the empire itself. A femur bearing the stress marks of childhood malnutrition might belong to a Gaul conscripted after conquest. A jawbone with dental work uncommon in the Mediterranean hints at an Iberian recruit. Even more poignant are the skeletons showing healed battlefield injuries, old arrows gouged from bone, fractures knit crookedly. Proof these men had survived past wars only to meet their end in the Teutoburg mud. Some of the most telling details come not from battle wounds, but from the quiet ravages of military life. Vertebrae deformed by years of marching under heavy packs, arthritic knees worn down by camp labor, even traces of chronic infections in sinus cavities, all sketch a portrait of endurance stretched to its limits. Then there are the anomalies. One skeleton, buried slightly apart from the rest, showed signs of congenital scoliosis. How did a man with a curved spine endure the legion's brutal training? Was he a clerk spared frontline combat, or did sheer determination keep him marching until the forest swallowed him whole? The teeth hold their own dark poetry. Dental plaque from a molar revealed traces of millet and barley, standard legion fare, but also pollen from a plant native to the eastern Mediterranean. Perhaps this soldier had recently been stationed in Syria before being redeployed to this rain-lashed frontier. Another's enamel bore microscopic grooves from repeatedly holding nails between his teeth, a habit common among carpenters and siege engineers. These aren't just anonymous bones, they're shattered biographies, each fragment whispering where its owner lived, what they ate, even how they worked. Perhaps the most haunting discovery came from a cluster of skeletons near what was once the bog's edge. These men showed no combat injuries. Instead, their hyoid bones, delicate throat structures, were fractured. Ancient sources describe Germanic tribes hanging captives as sacrifices to Woden. Were these the unlucky few who survived the ambush only to meet a darker fate? Or does their positioning, some facing east, others west, suggest a frantic, doomed scramble through terrain that became a trap within a trap? The soil refuses to give definitive answers, but the bones remain, each a cipher waiting to be read. What emerges from these forensic puzzles isn't just a story of death, but one of astonishing diversity. The lost legions weren't a monolith, they were a cross-section of Rome's sprawling empire, men pulled from a dozen cultures and bound together under the eagle standard. Their remains challenged the old notion of legions as purely Italian forces, revealing instead a military machine fueled by conquest and assimilation. Yet in the end, that very diversity couldn't save them. United under Varus, they marched as Romans, but in the forest's embrace they died as men, far from home, outnumbered, and forever lost to the turning of the leaves. Varus's defeat didn't just bury 3 legions, it shattered his family's future. The disaster at Teutoburg didn't merely stain his reputation, it condemned his bloodline to a grim spiral of disgrace and ruin. His son, Sextus Quinctilius Varus, shared his father's name but not his rank. By the time he entered adulthood, the Varus name was synonymous with catastrophe. The once proud dynasty, intertwined with Augustus's own family through marriage, now carried the stench of failure. Ancient historians like Tacitus note that Sextus struggled under the weight of his father's legacy, barred from military command despite his aristocratic birth. Rome had long memories, and no emperor wanted a Varus leading troops again. The family's downfall took an even darker turn with Varus's grandson, another Sextus. By the reign of Emperor Tiberius, the Varus name had become political poison, yet the younger Sextus, perhaps desperate to reclaim lost glory, entangled himself in one of Rome's most infamous scandals. In 27 AD, he was accused of conspiring with the ruthless Praetorian prefect Sejanus, a man whose ambitions had curdled into treason. The specifics are murky, but Cassius Dio's accounts suggest Sextus was among those purged when Sejanus's plot to overthrow Tiberius unraveled. The punishment was brutal, forced suicide, the same fate his grandfather had met in Germania. The irony was cruel. Varus's line, once celebrated, now extinguished by the very empire it had served. But the tragedy didn't end there. Varus's daughter, Claudia Pulchra, married into the imperial family, wedding Publius Quinctilius Varus the Younger, no relation despite the shared name, a man whose career also crumbled under Tiberius's suspicion. When Pulchra was later accused of treason and witchcraft in 26 AD, the charges reeked of political vendetta, her alleged crime consulting astrologers about the emperor's death. Whether true or fabricated, the outcome was fatal. Abandoned by her husband, she was exiled, her property seized. The message was clear: no thread of Varus's legacy would be spared. The family's obliteration wasn't just bad luck, it was a lesson in Roman politics. In an empire built on prestige, failure was contagious. Varus's defeat had rendered his descendants untouchable, their every move scrutinized for weakness or treachery. Even their marital ties to Augustus couldn't shield them. By the time Nero took the throne, the once great Quinctilii Vari were little more than a cautionary footnote, their name invoked only to illustrate the price of hubris. The forest had claimed more than legions. It had devoured a dynasty, leaving behind bones of another kind, broken lineages, buried ambitions, and the silent wreckage of pride. The Teutoburg disaster didn't just cost Rome 3 legions, it forced the empire to rethink its entire military doctrine. Before Varus marched into those fatal woods, Rome's army still clung to remnants of the old republic's model, citizen soldiers drafted for campaigns and disbanded afterward. But the annihilation of 20,000 men in a single stroke exposed the flaws in that system. You couldn't just replace trained legionaries like broken swords. The loss wasn't just tactical, it was generational. In the aftermath, Augustus and his successors enacted sweeping reforms that transformed Rome's military from a temporary militia into a standing professional force, one designed to endure disasters without collapsing. The first change was the simplest yet most radical. Soldiers signed up for 25-year terms, not seasonal campaigns. This wasn't just about retention. It was about creating an army of career warriors, men who'd spend decades mastering their craft. These weren't farmers handed a gladius on harvest break, they were full-time fighters, drilled to near perfection in formations, siegecraft, and frontier survival. The pay structure shifted too. Gone were the ad hoc bonuses of the Republic. Now salaries came regularly, with pensions in land or cash for veterans. Stability bred loyalty, and loyalty bred cohesion, exactly what Varus's fragmented command had lacked. Frontier policy tightened like a noose. Rome abandoned dreams of conquering Germania outright, opting instead for a strategy of defense in depth. Forts along the Rhine and Danube multiplied, not as launching pads for invasion, but as early warning systems and choke points. Auxiliary troops, non-citizen recruits from conquered territories, became the empire's new backbone. Unlike the legions, these units were light, mobile, and crucially familiar with local terrain. The logic was brutally pragmatic. Why send Italians to die in Germanic forests when Gauls or Thracians could patrol them more effectively? Training grew mercilessly realistic. New recruits didn't just spar in open fields, they rehearsed in dense woods, marshland, and mountain passes. Commanders studied Teutoburg like a cautionary textbook, drilling troops on ambush survival, how to maintain formation when attacked from all sides, how to turn baggage trains into makeshift fortifications. The Roman military machine, once overconfident in its open field supremacy, learned to respect the guerrilla tactics that had destroyed Varus. Even armor evolved. Archaeologists note a shift after 9 AD. Lighter segmentata plates replaced heavier chainmail in some units, trading protection for mobility in tight terrain. But perhaps the most telling reform was psychological. The eagle standards, once paraded as symbols of invincibility, became guarded like sacred relics. Losing one no longer meant just embarrassment, it meant disgrace so profound that entire units could be disbanded. When Germanicus retrieved 2 of Varus's eagles, it wasn't just a morale boost, it was propaganda, proof Rome could reclaim its honor. The lesson was clear: the legion's strength lay not just in numbers or steel, but in the unbreakable idea that Rome always eventually prevailed. Yet for all these changes, the reforms carried a quiet admission. The Teutoburg Forest had proven something unsettling. Rome wasn't unbeatable. Its armies could bleed, its borders could crack, and its enemies could learn. The professionalized legions of the post-Varus era weren't just a stronger force, they were a humbler one. The empire still expanded, but cautiously, always aware that beyond the next hill might lurk another Arminius, another forest, another day when the earth itself seemed to rise against them. The lost legions had died in vain, but their ghosts taught Rome how to survive. The notion of a unified Germanic resistance rising against Rome is more myth than reality. Before Arminius's ambush, the tribes of Germania were a fractured tapestry of rival clans, each with their own grudges and ambitions. The Cherusci, Marsi, and Bructeri might have shared a language and rough cultural ties, but they were no more a single nation than warring Greek city-states. What bound them together wasn't patriotism, it was opportunity. Arminius didn't inherit an alliance, he painstakingly stitched one together, exploiting shared resentment of Roman taxes and conscription. Even then, cooperation was fragile. Tacitus recounts how Segestes, a Cherusci elder and Arminius's own father-in-law, repeatedly warned Varus of the plot, preferring Roman patronage to tribal rebellion. The ambush succeeded not because Germania was united, but because Arminius understood how to weaponize chaos. The myth of Germanic unity took root centuries later, reshaped by nationalists hungry for origin stories. Medieval chroniclers, eager to glorify ancestral heroes, smoothed over tribal divisions, casting Arminius as a proto-German king rallying his people against foreign oppressors. By the 19th century, his legend had been polished into propaganda. The Hermannsdenkmal statue, erected in 1875, didn't just commemorate a battle, it invented a narrative. Here stood Hermann, a muscular, sword-wielding titan, his foot crushing a Roman eagle. Never mind that the real Arminius wore Roman armor, spoke Latin fluently, and likely saw himself as a Cherusci, not a German. The monument's inscription, "Germany's unity is my strength," would have baffled the historical figure who spent years battling rival chieftains after Teutoburg. This myth-making reached its darkest hour under the Nazis, who twisted Arminius into an Aryan icon. School textbooks framed Teutoburg as a racial triumph, where pure Germanic warriors repelled decadent Mediterranean invaders. The irony is staggering. Arminius's victory owed everything to his Roman education, his grasp of tactics, his ability to deceive, yet the regime erased those nuances. Even the battlefield's location became a political tool. Nazi archaeologists aggressively promoted Kalkriese as the site, not because of evidence which was scant at the time, but because it lay within Germany's borders, unlike rival theories pointing to the Netherlands. Modern scholarship has peeled back these layers of propaganda, revealing a far messier truth. Forensic evidence shows many Germanic warriors at Teutoburg fought with Roman weapons, likely deserters or auxiliaries who switched sides. Tribal unity crumbled quickly after the battle. Within years, Arminius was assassinated by rivals who saw him as a tyrant, not a liberator. The real story isn't one of national destiny. It's a tale of opportunism, betrayal, and the fleeting nature of alliances. Yet the myth persists because nations need founding legends, even if they're built on half-truths. The Teutoburg Forest wasn't Germany's birth, but it became the story many wanted to tell. And in that retelling, the messy, fractured past was smoothed into a sword swung for unity. History is full of armies swallowed by the sands of time, but few vanishings haunt us like the Lost Legion of Varus. Take the fabled army of Cambyses II, 50,000 Persian soldiers who marched into Egypt's western desert in 525 BC and never returned. Ancient writers like Herodotus spun tales of a monstrous sandstorm burying them alive, yet modern archaeologists have found no trace. Unlike Varus's legions, whose battlefield at Kalkriese yields bones and armor to this day, Cambyses's force left no physical evidence, blurring the line between history and myth. The Persian disappearance feels impersonal, a force erased by nature's whim. But Teutoburg, that was a meticulously orchestrated slaughter, its scars still etched in the soil. Then there's Rome's own 9th Legion, the Hispania, which vanished from Britain's northern frontier around 108 AD. Theories range from annihilation by Pictish tribes to redeployment elsewhere, but the lack of a definitive battlefield or mass graves makes it a bureaucratic mystery. The 9th's disappearance was slow, recorded 1 year, absent the next like a name fading from a ledger. Varus's legions, by contrast, met their end in a single, cataclysmic clash. Their fate wasn't administrative silence but a scream cut short, a disaster so seismic Rome could never pretend it hadn't happened. What sets Varus apart isn't just the scale of the loss but its psychological impact. Other lost armies faded into legend over centuries. The Teutoburg disaster struck like lightning, leaving Augustus to pound his fists in real time, demanding answers that never came. While Cambyses's army vanished in a foreign desert far from Persian heartlands, Varus's legions were annihilated on Rome's doorstep, a stone's throw from the Rhine. This wasn't a distant tragedy, it was a visceral wound, one that reshaped imperial strategy overnight. Even the survivors' stories differ. Greek historians claimed a handful of Cambyses's men stumbled back, babbling of gin and whirlwinds. The 9th Legion's theorists imagined deserters melting into British tribes, but Varus's troops, their endings feel grimly certain. The forensic evidence bog preserved bones, mass graves, armor fused to skeletons leaves little room for romantic escape. This wasn't a vanishing, it was a closing of fists, a forest that refused to give up its dead. Perhaps the starkest contrast lies in legacy. Cambyses's lost army became a cautionary fable, the 9th a historical shrug. But Teutoburg birthed something darker, a national myth for Germany, a ghost story for Rome, and a warning etched across 2,000 years. Other lost armies are riddles. Varus's legions are a reckoning. Standing 26 meters tall atop a wooded hill in Germany's Teutoburg Forest, the Hermannsdenkmal statue seems to glower at the horizon, its bronze fist clutching a sword pointed defiantly west toward Rome. Unveiled in 1875 after nearly 4 decades of construction, this colossus isn't just a tribute to Arminius, it's a statement carved in metal and stone. Climb the spiral staircase inside its pedestal, and you'll find inscriptions exalting German unity, added during a time when the country was stitching itself together from a patchwork of principalities. The monument's sheer scale, its sword alone stretches 7 meters, tells you everything about how 19th century nationalists viewed the battle, not as a tribal skirmish, but as the mythical birth of German identity. But step closer and contradictions emerge. The statue's designer, Ernst von Bandel, gave Arminius a winged helmet straight out of Wagnerian opera, a detail lifted more from Viking myths than historical record. Even the face, chiseled and stern, owes more to 19th century ideals than to any description of the real chieftain. This isn't history preserved, it's history reinvented, a symbol weaponized for a modern nation's growing pain. Just 30 kilometers north, the Kalkriese Museum takes a radically different approach. Here, there are no towering heroes or mythic poses, just glass cases filled with rusted nails, shattered skulls, and the personal effects of men who died in the mud. Opened in 2002 atop the actual battlefield, the museum feels more like a forensic lab than a memorial. Visitors walk suspended walkways over excavated trenches, peering down at the very soil where legionaries made their last stand. Audio guides play quotes from ancient sources alongside Germanic chants, refusing to take sides. Most striking are the human touches, a dice carved from bone, its edges worn smooth by anxious fingers, a child's sandal preserved in the bog for 2 millennia. These aren't symbols of triumph or defeat, they are fragments of lives interrupted. The contrast between these two sites reveals how differently Germany grapples with Teutoburg's legacy. The Hermannsdenkmal shouts, Kalkriese whispers, one glorifies the victors, the other mourns the vanquished. Yet even Kalkriese isn't neutral. Its exhibits quietly underscore the battle's global impact, how Rome's retreat shaped Europe's cultural divide between Latin South and Germanic North. You leave not with chest-thumping pride, but with a haunting question. What does it mean to memorialize a massacre? Across the Alps, Italy's approach is subtler still. In Rome's Museo della Civiltà Romana, a single glass drawer holds a replica of the recovered 17th Legion's eagle. No fanfare, just a label noting its return. The message is unmistakable. This is a relic of shame best kept in quiet custody. No Italian town boasts a statue of Varus. No plaques commemorate his doomed march. The battle lives on instead in classrooms, where it's taught as a lesson in imperial overreach. While German children grow up with Arminius as a folk hero, Italian students encounter him as a cautionary footnote, the barbarian who reminded Rome it wasn't invincible. Perhaps the most telling difference lies in tourism. Over 300,000 visitors flock to the Hermannsdenkmal annually, many during September's reenactment festival, where bearded tribesmen in faux furs clash with legionaries in polished armor. The event is part history, part pageant, with sausage stalls and mead vendors lining the paths. Kalkriese draws a quieter crowd, history buffs, archaeologists, and school groups shuffling past mass grave reconstructions with hushed respect. In Rome, the battle barely registers on tourist itineraries. You'll find more souvenirs of Caesar's triumphs than of Varus's folly. These divergent memorials reflect a deeper truth. History isn't fixed, but a mirror held up by whoever tells it. For Germany, Teutoburg is a founding myth, its lessons malleable enough to serve empires, republics, and dictators alike. For Italy, it's a scar best left unexamined, a reminder that even giants stumble. What unites both is the silence of the forest itself. Stand in Kalkriese at dusk, listening to the wind through the oaks, and you'll hear no cheers, no lament, just the indifferent rustle of leaves over bones long turned to dust. The land remembers, but it doesn't take sides. 2,000 years have passed since the Teutoburg Forest swallowed Varus and his legions, yet the mystery refuses to stay buried. What makes this ancient tragedy so enduring? It's more than just a military defeat, it's a story with everything. Betrayal, hubris, the clash of civilizations, and the haunting question of what might have been. For Rome, the loss wasn't just tactical, it was existential. The empire never again pushed east of the Rhine, leaving Germania to forge its own destiny. That single battle shaped the map of Europe, creating a cultural divide between Latin and Germanic worlds that echoes to this day. Had Varus succeeded, our history books might speak of a Roman Berlin or a legionary fort where Hamburg now stands. But the real allure lies in the unanswered questions. Unlike other ancient battles, Cannae, Thermopylae, Waterloo, Teutoburg isn't just about who won or lost. It's about vanishing. 20,000 men didn't just die, they disappeared into the fog of history, leaving behind fragments that tease us with possibilities. The lone cavalry mask crusted with rust, the child's toy preserved in peat, the scattered coins that may have slipped from a dying soldier's purse. These aren't just artifacts. Their doorways inviting us to imagine the faces behind them. Modern archaeology has peeled back layers of myth, yet the forest guards its secrets. Kalkriese confirms the scale of the slaughter, but the fate of individuals remains elusive. Were there survivors? Did the 19th Legion's eagle truly vanish, or does it still lie beneath some unmarked bog? Even the battlefield's ghosts feel more vivid than most historical footnotes. Rome's poets wrote of phantom legionaries marching in the mist, and today, visitors to the Teutoburg still report an uncanny hush beneath the oaks, as if the land itself remembers. Perhaps that's why this story grips us. It's not just history, it's a mirror. Teutoburg asks uncomfortable questions about empire, identity, and the limits of power. Arminius, the betrayer-turned-hero, forces us to confront how legends are forged and twisted. Varus, the scapegoat of Rome, reminds us that failure can echo louder than triumph. And the Lost Legions, they're everyone who's ever been swallowed by the consequences of arrogance or sheer bad luck. So here's where you come in. After centuries of debate, the mystery remains open. Were the legions wiped out to the last man, or did some carve out new lives beyond Rome's reach? Could fragments of their DNA linger in modern Germany, or did all traces truly vanish into the soil? The comment section is your battlefield. What's your theory? Share below and keep the conversation alive. After all, history isn't just about answers. It's about the stories we refuse to let die.